Hey guys, today is the first installment in our new trial, our test if you will, of using the flipped classroom. You're going to be learning about carbon compounds. That's section 3-3 in your textbook. You can be found on page 59 to 63. So you can follow along in your book at the same time or afterwards if you want to. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Practice makes perfect. In the meantime, before we actually start, please get out your organizer that you were given. If you lost it, you can find it under the tabs and print it out. It's the macromolecule organizer. And as we go along, you're going to fill that out for homework tonight. Then when we get in the classroom tomorrow, we'll have more time to play with the macromolecules and figure out how we can identify them and talk about them more in class. It's really crucial that you do your homework tonight so that we can all work together tomorrow. One final reminder, you can pause this at any time to make it easier to write down the information, and you can replay it as many times as you need to complete the graphic organizer. So good luck, have fun, thanks. So let's recall that we talked about a number of different elements that were important in making organic molecules, carbon being the most important one. So section 3-3 looks at the different compounds that we can make by putting carbon atoms with other elements, and they help to form living organisms and are important to us in life. So these molecules in your book are called biomolecules, living molecules, but they're also known as macromolecules. And macro means big, very big as a matter of fact. So those are big molecules. And there are 4 major types. And your job this evening is to get familiar with each of the major types and find out what smaller subunits each of them is composed of. They are all composed of unique smaller subunits. One thing they all have in common is that they all contain carbon. The first major group is called carbohydrates, and I'm sure you've heard that word carbohydrate. You hear about it in nutrition labels and maybe on TV, or if you're getting ready to run a race, you might load up on carbs. Carbohydrates are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And you note that I'm using the symbols C, H, and O here. The smallest subunit of all carbohydrates is glucose. It's a simple sugar. And carbohydrates are used for energy storage, structural things, and identification of cells. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Mono meaning one, so it literally means one sugar. And here is a diagram of glucose. You see it's a simple ring shape, and you can see all the carbons. They are numbered with red letters, that there are 6 carbons. Sucrose is a common disaccharide, which means 2 sugars. Sucrose is actually table sugar that you would use. You might sprinkle it on your cereal or put it in your coffee. It is composed of 2 simple sugars, one being glucose, the other being fructose. You don't really need to know that, but you should know that sucrose is a disaccharide. Glucose can come together with many other simple sugars to form what is called a polysaccharide, or many sugars. These are long, big molecules. The second type of macromolecule is called a lipid. Lipids are also composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and yet they're very different from sugars or carbohydrates. They do store energy, and they also have a job of protecting your organs. These include fats, phospholipids, waxes, and steroids. Here's a picture of a lipid. A most common type of lipid would be made of something called glycerin or glycerol, and you can see it's got 3 carbons on the left-hand side, and it has 3 long chains of fatty acids that you can see on the right-hand side. So it's composed of a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. It is non-polar. If you recall when we talked about water being a polar molecule, that meant it had positive and negatively charged ends. Lipids do not have those poles or charges, so that doesn't like water. The third type of macromolecule is proteins. Proteins are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, which is new, and sulfur. The smallest subunit of a protein is an amino acid. Proteins are important in the structure of cells, cell signaling, and catalyzing reactions, or making them go faster. Here is the structure of an amino acid. You can see in the middle it's composed of carbon, and on your left-hand side you can see the amino group. It has the nitrogen with the 3 hydrogens. And on the right-hand side you have a carboxyl group. It has a carbon which has a double bond with 1 oxygen, and it has another oxygen. It shows a negative here, but that could also have a hydrogen. The R group, R is not an element, but R is actually what changes. There are a number of different amino acids, and each one of them has a different molecule or group of molecules attached at that point. That's what makes each amino acid different. Amino acids come together by something called a peptide bond, and this is between the amino group of one amino acid and the carboxyl group of another amino acid. So if you look at this diagram, at the top we have 2 amino acids. The amino group is in blue, and the acid or carboxyl group is in red, so that you can see them. And down at the bottom you can see they have the carboxyl group lost a OH or a hydroxyl group, and the amino group lost some hydrogens in order to form that peptide bond. Now, proteins are kind of interesting, and they have several levels of structure. The first level of structure is called primary. This is the order of the amino acids. The secondary structure is folding due to side groups on the amino acids. And if you remember your amino acid structure, you saw where those side groups were. That's the R. Tertiary structure, it folds up a little more, gets a little more clumpy or lumpy. And finally, there's quaternary structure, quarter meaning 4. And this is when you take 2 or more polypeptides, that tertiary structure, and you put them together. You have 2 examples here. One is collagen, and that's the one on the left. And on the right-hand side, you see hemoglobin, and this is the one I really hope that you would remember. And hemoglobin is what carries oxygen in your blood, and you'll see that it has 4 subunits that are held together in order to carry oxygen. Okay, so I'd like to elaborate on that structure thing with proteins, and to do that I'm going to use an ordinary roll of paper towel. First of all, I'm going to rip a piece. Voila. This long piece of paper towel is kind of representative of the primary structure. It's just long and straight and not really doing much. Now, secondary structure, we start to twist it up, and it's going because it wants to be near things. Remember hydrogen bonds we talked about? These hydrogen bonds are going to make it want to sort of twist. It's not playing very well with me, is it? So it's going to want to twist. And then over here we're going to make some pleats. And these are the ways that proteins like to fold in their secondary structure. Okay? Now still, we're not done. We have tertiary structure to worry about. And in tertiary structure they kind of go like this. And they form this lump. And this lump that you see right here, it may not look like much to you, but this is the way that the protein's active, the way it can do its thing. And when we go forward into enzymes a little later in this chapter, we're going to see how important this tertiary structure is. Okay, so back to the notes. The final group of macromolecules is the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and they differ in that they have phosphorus. So, the smallest subunit of a nucleic acid is the nucleotide. The job of nucleic acids is to store and transmit hereditary material, the stuff that says what you're made, who you are, and where you came from. They carry information. Examples of nucleic acids are DNA, RNA, and ATP. Here is a diagram of a nucleotide. In orange, the orange circle is a phosphate group. The blue pentagon is deoxyribose sugar. We'll be looking at this in more depth when we get into DNA and RNA later this year, but deoxyribose sugar is found in DNA. And in green we have the base, and the base is a variable component of the nucleotide. Nucleotides form long chains, and you can see by this diagram here that the phosphates form links, kind of like, it almost looks like a bracelet or a necklace. And we have a phosphate, sugar, and you notice that the bases are sticking off to the side. DNA consists of two chains. It's also called the double helix. I'm sure you've heard that before. So, there you go. There's carbon compounds, section 3-3. If you didn't get all the information at this time, I would advise that you replay this little video, pause when you need to, replay it as many times as you need to until you feel comfortable with the information. Remember that you can also use your book, page 59 to 63, has all the same information in written form. It can't hurt to practice. There's also some links and videos in this section on macromolecules, and I urge you to use them to help you in your understanding of the material, and you can use it again to review as many times as you need so that you are a master of carbon compounds.